And we're back.
Well, it's been quite a while, hasn't it?
Oh God, I can't actually remember the last time. Must have been March, I would have said.
I think it was probably early March, like very beginning of March.
Would you reckon it was March?
I think so. It's what was the last one we did? Was it a
I think it was communication books. It might have been difficult conversations. Yeah, I'm actually intrigued now to the point where I'm actually gonna have a little search because it has been that long. We are gonna continue with the communication theme, and today we're gonna be reviewing and summarizing "Conflicted" by Ian Leslie, isn't it? Or it is Ian Leslie, right?
Yeah.
Perfect.
Yeah. Yes, and then after this, we're gonna actually let's not get ahead of ourselves.
Yeah,
let's just one step at a
time. In fact, the last one, bro, was 23rd of February. Can you believe it?
Fuck, really? Wow.
Yes, it's what's that? 4 months. The best part of 4 months. Anyway, we are back.
We're back,
and we are now back reading books again. So we have read "Conflicted" for you, which is all about arguing essentially and arguing productively, and also it explores the sort of merits of arguing as well and why we should argue in a world where I feel like, I don't know, we're almost told not to argue, and that arguing just causes conflict and I guess you could say pain as well. But so yeah, we'll just jump straight into it. So the book it starts with the current landscape of argumentation, where it kind of argues that in the current world we live in, we almost avoid argumentation apart from on social media. And he discerns the difference between high context environments and low context environments. And basically what he means by that was, in the past, a high context environment could be when you're having an argument, you can read many different things, such as the content said by somebody, the body language, the tone, I guess the social context as well of this person, because you're in a small tribe, let's just say. So you could interpret what they were saying to you through, a pretty coherent lens from multiple angles, let's just say. And we currently live in a world where a lot of arguments are based on social media, where you could say it's low context in the sense that, rarely are the conversation or the arguments, on social media based on like video calls where you can kind of see the person's face, you can read the way they're saying things. It's very much text-based, text-heavy, which means there's plenty of room for like misinterpretation of satire, jokes, the way they're saying things. Like they might be saying something in a way that's like a question, like, how like if you say a word and you like, or say something and then you have an intonation which is higher, like, is this okay? Like that's like a question. Whereas in text, you kind of can't really, obviously you put a question mark, right? But there's some things that people say that just can't be communicated through text. And he basically argues saying that in this low context world, we're not really built for it. And therefore we find ourselves arguing in circles because we shouldn't even be arguing in the first place, because things in a life, a one-on-one sort of environment would never have been arguable because you're misinterpreting the stuff I'm saying.
Yeah, no, precisely. Like I agree with that. And I think it is interesting because when we were summarizing kind of, social warming, it showed you the different effects that occur from using different social media platforms. So the arguments or the problems that arise from using Twitter or Facebook or Instagram are slightly different because each one has a different kind of landscape, right? So like you were just saying, when we're face to face, we have all this like additional sensory information, your tone of voice, different visual stimuli, all these things that help us to kind of interpret the context. And it's interesting because when you take all of that away and you manipulate it in different ways, such as Instagram, Facebook, or Twitter, like Twitter, you have 140 characters, right? That's slightly different to what it's like if you're on Instagram or on Facebook. And so each one kind of changes the landscape with how you communicate with people. And so then we end up, we're evolved to have like, a lot of context, and yet we're deprived of that in different ways on these different platforms. And that's how it affects us. And hence we have like all these arguments, which in real life we probably actually
which could be possibly be avoided.
Consensus. Yeah.
I would even also argue they probably wouldn't even have happened because of the fact that people in person tend to be less confident, because, if I called you a dumb fuck, let's say in person, you could batter me. Yeah. You could beat me up, whereas online there is sort of no there's no repercussions. You kind of get what I mean. It's almost like you're incentivized in a way to be more argumentative, because there's no repercussions for being like that.
There's no social status at like jeopardy. All these things come into like which actually is like interesting, because then that kind of means that you would only normally have these kind of conversations if you felt deeply about them.
Yeah.
Do you get what I mean? Because like the stakes are higher. So the only time I'm actually going to try and cause a conflict is if it's something that I actually care about. Obviously it goes the other end of the spectrum, and people can be very shy and stuff like that. And so maybe they just won't come out. But it goes to say that, you can talk about any shit online because it's devalued, because, you're not, like you said, there's no ramifications for it. Yeah. Interesting.
Yeah, no, it is. It's, it is crazy to think that it is literally as simple as this low context, high context. If you really think about it as well with the social media, it's people just take things completely out of the context it was originally said as well. So for example, like, I don't know, somebody says something and it gets passed down the grapevine into like text bits. So like somebody could say something completely as a joke. Like you could watch, I don't know, any person, like I guess Peterson's quite a good example where he says stuff which is like with caveats. Like you'll say something with caveats, but then you just take that one bit of text and you put it as a headline and be like, Peterson said this.
I know.
And it's like, oh my God, like, we all say stuff which, if you removed the rest of the sentences, could actually end up being very controversial, because you could say something like, I do not believe, and say the thing. They could be like, person believes this. Do you get what I mean? It's that simple.
It's so interesting though, isn't it? Because it's just like emotion plays such a big part of how we communicate to one another, and yet that is basically deprived of when you're online. You can't tell if something like, the same words can be expressed in multiple different ways depending on the emotion that you use to convey that. But online, you can do fucking caps lock if you're fucking angry, or like, you make it really eloquent, but actually most of the time it's very hard to determine that.
And also, if people say really brutal things, like I feel like sometimes it's almost used for comedic effect. People say something like really brutal because it's like so, people just don't say it. Therefore, they say it in a way that's like funny, because it's just like, wow, I can't believe you said that. That's hilarious. Like, it's just ridiculous. Like, I can't. But if you had it in text, it's like, this guy is like the worst human being ever.
Exactly.
So it's mental how, but like it's also mental how people don't realize that that's the case as well. They forget. They almost like project their own stories onto these things. Like they see the low context text, and then they like project onto these words like the worst case, instead of thinking like, could this person be joking? How could this be misconstrued? But I guess like you have limited like cognitive ability or like cognitive function every day. You're like, you got a lot of things going on in your life. It's not the first thing to be like, I'm going to doubt what I see here. But it is interesting. That's the default.
It's interesting because I wonder if, I'm just thinking about like GIFs and memes, right? Whether they're an additional layer to text that kind of provides some kind of context, right? Because most GIFs are obviously like videos with like text. But when you provide obviously a video with text, it is giving.
I would even say even emojis. Like I feel like the purpose of emojis originally like came from the fact that with text you can't portray the emotions you want. So therefore you add an emoji. So like you say something and then you add like an emoji with a tongue sticking out. All of a sudden it's like it's a joke. It's cheeky. And it's the same with. You're right. It is the same with GIFs. You say something and then you have like, I don't know, like a squirrel doing something or whatever, and then all of a sudden it's like, this isn't like a serious comment. Because it can't be, because they've just added that extra information to be like, this is a joke. And I feel like that's why interesting enough, like when friends are close enough, they can joke about things that other people can't, because it's like, you know them so well that whatever's being put into this, like these words you're saying, is just a joke. It can't be real. Like,
Yeah. Well, because you know the context
yeah, you know the
of
context,
them,
which is
don't
like
you?
this. Yeah, exactly. Which is, yeah, I mean, we're going to get onto that later, but that's another good point as well. Like, when you see people on social media, I mean, obviously you see the context of like what they're trying to portray, but also there's a lot of accounts without any, posts or whatever. So how can you ever judge this person? Yet you're trying to judge somebody off this one specific bit of text or whatever, yet you know nothing about them. And yet you think you have the right to decide who they are, like, or like have a judgment based upon what they're saying. And it's like, you characterize people on what they're saying, which I can understand if they're saying something so blanketly wrong, like, say something like just racist, like directly, like so obviously like bad, then you can probably be like, okay, this is not a good person to deal with. But when it's like ambiguous, I find it fascinating that people are so quick to be like, oh my God, this person's terrible.
Yeah. Yeah.
Before they even know this person. Like, this person has a family, their kids are growing up, like they've looked after their mum all their life. Like, there's so much more to people than just, they've just said one thing on social media and they're now the worst human ever,
Well, it's
because you've
it's
decided.
also, well, like I think there's, we'll get onto this later, but there is a point in the book where he talks about normally before you start having a conversation about fucking politics, you would have introduced yourself, you would have said what you do, a bit of information about you, right? It's not the first thing that you just bring up is something morally outrageous. And I think that's the difference, is he brought it up in like the first chapter, that we may engage in conversations in real life and in conflict when something is morally outrageous, but we don't actually come across those things very often. But when you're online, it's a completely different matter, because those things are the things that get shared. Those things
They
are
get the
things
most
that you come
engagement,
into
right?
contact all the time. So think about it, you're online and the first thing you hear out of someone's mouth, or literally like a text, is something morally outrageous. You don't know anything about them, but the only thing you know about them is that they're being morally outrageous.
Yeah.
So no wonder, like, we end up just he is the devil. We
Yeah,
just
but
give blanket.
it's funny because it
labels.
ends up in a way where like just bad actors come in and just be morally outrageous, for the fact that the more morally outrageous they can be, the more engagement they get, and therefore the more popular they get with. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's it's people. I guess people aren't aware of the game that's being played to a degree, and that is kind of what's happening. But I think what's quite interesting about this as well, in terms of not just the landscape of the way the argumentation is done now, is more like the cultural perspective on what arguments are. Like, I feel like what we were saying before this was that, everybody's quite polite these days. It's almost like taboo to argue with somebody. Like, conflict is always kind of avoided almost at all costs. And especially, he was arguing this book in the workplace, whereas like everybody's expected to get along, especially as well in the workplace where there's like a power dynamic. So like, there's a boss, a manager, who basically people feel like they need to appease, because if they don't appease, they might lose their job. And what that does is that fosters a culture where there is no argumentation, and therefore you could argue no shared truth, because people are afraid to say what they truly believe, because they're scared to argue. And then he says that there isn't really a word for like a disagreement or an argument that's productive, because we always think of arguments as destructive. Like, you lose your relationship over an argument. There's a winner and loser. Is combative, rather than, like you were saying to me before, like an argument could be like a dance. But it's not even just that. It's more like we literally don't have a word, which is like an argument that builds people up. I guess you could almost argue therapy in some way is kind of like that, where you put forward your truth and somebody feeds back to you their version of what you've just said and tries to build with you a new agreement. Like, it is kind of like an argument, but it's a way less combative argument. It's like, oh, this is my story, and I guess the therapist says, and how does that make you feel, and tries to reveal more and tries to probably push back as well towards what you think, right? So there is a level where it's like you are arguing, you're basically both putting out your views of something, and you're trying to find something greater from it. Like he says, productive disagreement. But I'm convinced there's a better one, like a growth argument. That's not good enough for it. But
well, it's interesting, isn't it? Because it's for you to come up with a word, the word has to insinuate that both have some kind of common goal, or have a goal that is bigger than themselves in a sense. So like, okay, you could say truth, but not every discussion is about just like, a belief, right? It may be about something that you're doing at work, right? The best solution to get to from A to B, but it still has to be something that both people are invested in. And that's like what I can understand that from like a therapy kind of view, because obviously the therapist wants you to get better and you want to get better, right? So it's like a common goal. But it is, I think in a business, like that does make it hard, because obviously you've got like a hierarchy, like a hierarchical system, authority, like, you know, it stems back to the question books that we've summarized, in terms of sometimes questioning is seen as like rebelling against authority and those kinds of things. And I think it also stems from like our schooling, whereby, you know, we don't want to be seen to made it, like we don't want to make mistakes, you know, because it's the same thing, you know, like here it's like we don't want conflict, we want everything to just be like fine. But the thing is, fine is boring, fine is just neutral. You kind of always want to be progressive.
There's no growth in fine. There's no growth in fine.
But the issue is that with progress there is always risk, right? Obviously it depends on how much of a jump you take, or a leap of faith, but there will always be risk. And I think that's where like conflict can, like out of conflict there can become, you know, what's the thing, actually, this is a very Jordan Peterson-esque thing, isn't it? It's like into the fog you'll find like a gem, isn't it, or something? It's
Something like that.
It's like from the conflict there something will arise.
He talks about it, and I think all these communication books kind of step on the same thing, which is like when you have this conflict, you're both putting into the, what was it, crucial conversations, the pool of meaning. Like you're both adding, like if you're having conflict with somebody, you're both adding your own versions of the events or what you want. And therefore from that, you can synergize the two things that are being said, or you can at least become aware of what the other person is thinking. Because without them putting their sort of, you know, point of view into the conversation, you will live your life without knowing their point of view. And that can harbor resentment and all sorts of other problems down the line, right? And like you said, it is kind of like pointing towards truth in a way. It's like, I'm going to express to you my truth and you're going to express to me your truth, and then we're going to try and work a way that we can weave these together in a satisfactory way, I guess.
But then the only issue with that, right, is that then you have to care about the truth. Right? Because realistically, like we've said this quite a bit, but like, what is it? Truth comes second to reputation, or like social status, right? Because truth, in an ideal world, we'd all like truth, but if everyone agrees on something, then it doesn't matter, because you're part of a group and you're still surviving and everything like that, right? So you would have to properly value the pursuit of truth over your social reputation, you know, which is like, obviously,
which is more important to most people, I guess. Which is almost arguably why people don't even put the truth forward, because they're too scared that, you know, if they put it forward, they might lose their reputation or upset somebody, which I think is what we're talking before this. Like, we kind of avoid conflict as well because we're afraid to, you know, upset other people by telling them something maybe they don't want to hear. Yet once again, part of the reason why we're scared is because I think what happens is people mischaracterize when you give feedback or criticize, you basically take it personally. You believe it's like an assault on you as an individual. And I think that's what Crucial Conversations, if you remember, was trying to say. It was like, you kind of express your intentions. It's like, I'm not attacking you here. Like, I've heard what you had to say. Like, this is not you. I'm attacking you like your idea. It's like nothing. You're not a bad person. You're not stupid. It's just your idea. I don't like your idea because this, and this. And you're trying to separate, like the argument shouldn't be characterological and reputational, because the moment it is reputational, the conflict is less about progression and mutual understanding. It's more like a battle of status, right? Like if I'm like, oh, that's a stupid idea, I haven't criticized the idea, I've almost criticized you by just saying it's stupid. And therefore with all this type of stuff, you have to kind of be careful with the reputation. I mean, I think that's one of the points we have down here anyway, isn't it, while we get into it? But
it is actually really interesting, because think about like when we talk about like Piaget and the whole idea of like egocentrism, right? We look at everything towards us. Well, think about knowledge as this kind of, it's an ether. There's eternal knowledge. We're constantly trying to figure out what it is, but it's almost like it bestows a few cards. Like we've got a handful of cards, but our cards are different to someone else's. We just happen to have accumulated them over our life. So we can't judge the other person for the cards that they've been dealt. Do you get what I mean? So it's like, like you were just going off what you were saying, is in like, I'm not judging you. I'm not like, attacking what you believe. You just happen to know what you happen to know, and I happen to know what I happen to know.
Yeah.
Right. And the whole idea is that I just
Yeah.
want to see how they kind of merge.
How
and
can they
interact.
meet? Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Right. So it's like, if you think about it like that, it's like, yes, okay, you can believe that these are your beliefs, but really they're just fucking beliefs that you happen to come across in your lifetime, that you identify with, or have personified. But actually, it's just something that we happen to have come across, and other people have different different knowledge.
But this is like across all these communication books. It is a level of like trying to make it clear that the whole reason we're even in conflict right now, or having this conversation, is less about like making you feel bad. It's more about trying to find some agreement between the two of us. And I guess that's where this point, where I think you wrote it down here, wasn't it? Or is it the bond of trust that we're ultimately working together? So it's like this idea of trying to create like a subcontext where, like, this isn't a battle. We're just both trying to work together for like a common goal, which is like understanding of each other. So like, this is not about criticizing your idea. This is just more so I can understand where you're coming from. Like, obviously it's a lot easier said than done, but it's just catching these conversations before they happen. And I feel like a lot of the time when, arguments get sort of like messy, it's less because you're actually arguing about the content. You're more arguing about the character, like the characters. You basically insulted somebody's character, and therefore they're going to defend it. And if you really look into it, I guess it's that level of like, everybody has their own story of who they believe they are, sorry. And when you're like mischaracterizing them, you're basically taking the thing that they believe to be true about their whole life and just saying, yeah, no, that's all shit. You're dumb. And that obviously gets like a massive like immune response from them, which is like, nah, I'm going to reject that, and I'm going to be really aggressive because, I will not accept that as the truth. Yeah, it's not because you have to, but I feel like a lot of it's to do with like damage towards people's stories that they tell themselves.
Yeah, 100%, because they can't separate themselves from the beliefs that they hold. It might be so embedded that they just identify as that belief.
Well, it's the one thing they've got, which is like their version of truth, and therefore they can't accept anything else because the one thing they hold on to, I guess, it's
And if it's we talked about this in terms of Jordan Peterson, but if it acts as like a foundation to your character, and then loads of other things are built on top of it, well, attacking that foundation means that everything else is kind of destabilizing. So either it's done in such a way that it allows the person to reconfigure all of that, or he's going to double down and not really open up at all because he doesn't want that foundation to be changed.
The way I think you put it as well is if you shake that foundation, everything above it has to come crumbling down like a tower, right? It's you have to rethink everything once the foundation comes out. But yeah, I thought that was specifically quite interesting, just like how we've almost been taught, especially in, like we were saying before, in England and sort of Britain, where like we're very polite, so we kind of withhold, like you were saying, it is literally withholding the truth, because it's like, I'm not going to tell you what I think of you because I'm afraid to piss you off. And therefore we all avoid conflict at all costs, when in reality, putting forward what we believe in a way that's like, in a way that's just, I guess, friendly, in a way that's like from the best intentions, you're gonna get more from that conversation you're gonna get from any conversation, which I feel like literally the whole premise of therapy is literally getting to that point where we are happy to talk to each other about the things we actually feel. Do you get what I mean? Like, what's marriage counseling or marriage therapy apart from basically somebody sitting there mediating an argument between you two about what you truly feel? Like, it literally is that, right?
Isn't
like,
it kind of like, it's weird when you actually think about like therapy is something that people go to, rather than like therapy is something that we just don't do as human beings anymore.
Which we could do if
we
were talking in a way that was more
talk about. We don't talk in a way like that
culturally, like we repress. Exactly, we repress a lot of stuff, which I think is a lot of the reason why it becomes necessary. I feel like Americans are quite shit hot on their therapy because of the fact that they're very open and expressive of the things they feel, like almost to the point where it's almost annoying, but like they get it. They get the need to like express, I think, in comparison to the English.
Well, yeah, exactly. And like we've said before, like before the recording, is, we used to have like Russian mates at school, and their culture is very different, and they come across to us as very blunt because they just say what's on their mind. But actually, you know, it's just such a contrast to us where we never really say what's on our mind and we beat around the bush and we're very polite about it. And it's really weird. Actually, I wonder why we have such a deep drinking culture, because we tend to talk more when we start drinking.
Yes, fascinating. I'd probably argue that would definitely be a reason for it, like a factor for sure. There's no doubt in my head.
Yeah, but actually, on that note, I remember reading The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Fuck, I think that's by Mark Manson, and he was talking about Russian culture, and he was talking about how they spoke to each other and how they are quite blunt. But he was saying that a reason for that was that during like Stalin's time and the years post that, is that they didn't have many like resources, and so they'd kind of use like truth as a means of like communicating to one another, because it's the only thing that they kind of had at the time. I can't really remember the specifics, but it was like, it's interesting to think that that's why they might be more honest with one another, because of their cultural like the things that are going on at the time.
I think I remember reading something like that as well.
Something like that. Yeah. I'm maybe not drawing the right link, but it was something around that.
It was something like that. It was 100%. But you're right. That is, the whole idea of speaking what you think, I guess, is.
And it was interesting because I've just been to the Caribbean, and I hitchhiked. This woman picked us up in her car, and she was talking about British people and American people on the island, and she was saying like British people really don't make an effort to like get involved with people. Like they're a bit cliquey, and they'll like only hang out with other English people, because and it is weird, because while I was there, I found it much easier to just talk to English people, because there's context there. You get them, right? Like you already have half the deal already there, and then it's just, you can chat openly.
You understand the culture better, I guess, so you kind of understand what's acceptable, what's not. Whereas I guess the English almost see Americans and go like, fucking hell, they're a bit like, you know, their energy, I can't match that.
No, but that's the thing. So Americans, they were like, I'm envious of their ability to just walk up to anyone and just start a conversation, because that would never fucking happen in Britain. Like, oh my God, like think about, like, we love to queue and we still don't get into a conversation here. Like, you know, it's.
We sometimes do. There's always like the classic, you sort of like walk in by, you make a comment on the queue, but I'll ask queue's long. And they're like, yeah, it is. And it's just like, that's kind of literally how. And then you feel great for just, you know, chatting to somebody, even if it's for like 5 seconds. Like, I still spoke to somebody. He's like, unreal. That's my job for today. It's it's interesting when you dissect yourself to the point where it's like, that is literally how it is. But it doesn't have to be like that, right? Like the Americans are almost proof that you don't have to be like that. But a lot of this, I think this, I guess also Ian Leslie is British as well. I think he's English.
Yeah, I think so. He is,
I feel like a lot of his stuff was written with having conversations with English sort of therapists and stuff like that as well. I would have said possibly.
I got that vibe.
But yes, let's move on. So we've talked about the sort of like opportunity of conflict in the end, like in the idea that, you know, bringing together two opposing viewpoints. And obviously, I guess even for like business as well, it's great to have like conflicting ideas of what to do next, because at least then you've got different ideas to sort of balance and to factor into your decision to make a better decision, right? People bring stuff to the table that you might never have thought of.
And I like, just to add to that, actually, I remember it from that chapter, him saying that they got some people to like, was it play devil's advocate? In like, they were trying to come up with a solution, and they wanted someone to play devil's advocate, and they were going to see whether they could find like the best kind of decision or solution, you know, whatnot. And they found that people who actually who were the devil's advocate but actually believed in what they were saying, ended up like they ended up creating a much better decision, rather than someone who's just pretending to be like, oh no, that won't work without. Exactly. So it has to be kind of genuine behind it.
It has to be a genuine devil's advocate, but therefore you need almost like a culture where you can encourage people to disagree, right? I think I even mentioned this in the book, like businesses that don't have people who disagree end up becoming like almost like Russia with Stalin, like where nobody can, you know, say something otherwise, and therefore you basically end up with like a semi-dictatorship in a business, because nobody else can, you know, put their mind forward. Therefore you're just at a whim to the CEO, let's just say. And that's never, in my head, good for overall progress, because they're always going to be missing information because they're not on they're running the business, but they're not in the business.
Yeah.
They're on top
And
of it.
also,
So, yeah.
Also, it's going to sensitize them to being challenged, won't it?
Yes.
If a dictator is never challenged, then they become more sensitive to anyone challenging.
Yes, no, it's a bit like the ego thing, isn't it? If you're a kid and you never have, I guess, if you never get bullied to a degree, you never kind of have that person who's going to bring you down a notch. Imagine if you just like coddled all your life, like you just everybody's telling you you're the best, you're the best, you're the best, you're the best, you're the best. Nobody ever told you you're not the best. Nobody ever beat you up or whatever as a kid. It's not justifying bullying in any fucking sense, but people who just get coddled like that end up being probably the most evil people, or not the most, but like, you know what I mean? They have such fragile egos to the point where if you ever give them disconfirming evidence, because everything you said, like this tower of foundation has been built up upon you being the best, all of a sudden when somebody says to you you're not the best, or life gives you a punch in the stomach and says you're not the best now that you left school, let's just say, and you're in the big wide world, all of a sudden you're at a loss, right? How do you reconcile all this information before that was telling you you're amazing, and now all of a sudden you're not? And then I guess there's a few ways people deal with it. One of them is they sort of like, deeply reflect for a while and try and grow, or you get put straight into like some sort of form of depression or sadness where you can't really get out of it, or you become somebody who becomes really like not evil, but like what's the word, like detest the world because like what's rightfully theirs has been taken or whatever. It's never good. I can imagine. I can't imagine a world where having that sort of level of a fragile ego doesn't end well.
Think about like what Roy Baumeister said in Evil, when you have an inflated ego. And
that was one of his prerequisites, wasn't it?
Like
everybody, like most people who are evil, like one of the prerequisites is you have like a really inflated ego. And his point was it was counterintuitive because the previous research was the people who committed the most crimes, who were the most evil, were the people with really low self-esteem. Whereas he was basically saying it's absolutely the opposite. It's the complete opposite. It's people who have a really high self.
And not accurate, because there's a mismatch of how people interact with them, and so they think that they're being either malicious or hostile or insulting them, and it can lead them to be aggressive. It's quite so. I can imagine people who are mollycoddled.
And I do think as well it also happens a lot to people, you're right, with high in the hierarchy, because it is scary to disagree with somebody who literally holds your job in their hands. And it depends on the temperament of the person. I feel like the best people, the best bosses or the best leaders are the ones who can actually take a punch or take like a disagreement and actually run with it. Whereas there's obviously some people out there who literally can't, and therefore people are even more scared to disagree, because all of a sudden, if you disagree, you're getting fired in the morning, or everybody's going to be railing against you because like you disagreed. And I feel like it's a bit of a cycle with that. Because I found it really interesting. I was reading, what was it, Built by Tony Fadell recently. He basically created the iPod, and he's talking about Steve Jobs, and I found it really interesting that Steve Jobs had that like mindset, desire of like excellence, and like he was egotistical, he was like pretty mean to people, but like if you were right, he would, if you were right and you could prove it, he would accept it. Like he'd be like, I'm wrong, but like you have to like prove him, like you have to prove it to him. But I thought that was quite interesting, because obviously he was a sort of visionary leader, and although he probably was he wasn't obviously somebody who was like took everybody's ideas, but like if you could prove to him that you were right, like he'd be like, yeah, fair enough, I'm completely wrong, like let's go with what you're saying. Which is obviously, it's just interesting to see that was the case, because he's obviously somebody a lot of people look up to.
Absolutely.
And he obviously loved the idea as well of conflict in general. Like he encouraged, all his teams had more than 5 people in there debating like how to build things, because he understood the role of ideation and people going back and forth and arguing with each other and trying to figure out the best way. Because you said, everybody has a different opinion. Everybody knows stuff that other people don't know. And somebody might say, oh, we should do this, with lack of knowledge of the fact that it's probably not possible. Whereas somebody could come in and be like, that's not possible. But then you also kind of need somebody as well to be like, let's make it possible. Because sometimes people think they know what they know, and they don't realize they're missing the information, which it could be possible now. Let's just say.
No, but that's it. I think that's why it's like creativity in its like definition is like basically synergistic. It's what Matt Ridley talks about in terms of like ideas having sex. It's like everyone's got an idea, but like how do you improve those ideas? We need 2 ideas to just knock together and be synergistic and create something. And I think you have to have that. And the only way that you can do that is by actually discussing that and maybe disagreeing. But if you both disagree, then you have to come to some kind of solution, and it forces you to try and get to that goal. Yeah.
No, it is. No, it's 100% like that. Like you have to have this. Like, I genuinely don't believe it's a single player game in that sense. If you're in this sort of like growth, creativity type of like sphere, it's definitely a multiplayer, multiple people bouncing ideas off. Like it has to be. Like I think it was quite interesting as well from reading that built book, and I'm starting to read The Science of Storytelling now by Will Storr. We have this like these myths of like individuals who are just like who drive the future, like Einstein or whatever. You have these ideas of individuals who are like exceptionally brilliant. Yet from the thing I was reading about Steve Jobs, like he didn't create the iPod. Like he owned the company that created the iPod, and he helped drive its creation. But there was a team of like 20 designers all coming up with different, like he had a vision at the same time. Like don't get me wrong, like he was good. But at the same time, it wasn't just him. Like there was so many other people involved in it, and we always forget. Like even with films, you see film stars, and you're like, oh wow. But then you see, you go to the credits, and you see like a list of like 100 people, and then all of a sudden you're like, oh fuck me, that's how many people it takes to like produce something like this. And yet we always, for some reason, I feel like it's that level of like egotism. Everybody wants to believe that they're the hero of their own story, so they want to believe in this idea that individuals are great and they are the ones that like achieve everything. But in reality, it's always multiplayer. Like it's
something
always
didn't come from nothing. Or
it didn't just come from an individual, right? Like even if you have a great idea, you have to like bounce off other people. You have to prove that it's right. You have to like come up with ways to bring it to life. And that's usually with multiple people, not just yourself. And I think we forget that, and that's why I guess this is why he kind of argues for why we should argue, because if you just think you're right all the time, eventually somebody's going to tell you you're wrong, and it's not going to be other people. It's going to be reality, and it's better to just get out there first and try and argue people and understand, or use conflict to generate new ideas, etc.
Precisely. I think it's a bit of a universal law as well. Just like for anything to like be created, it has to come out of something, and normally that is like two kind of forces, whatever they may be, but they kind of have to interact to create something.
100%. Like
water doesn't just morph into something else; it needs something else.
It needs something else to do it. 100%. I mean, a lot of creativity, like if you do like a lot of creativity, like workshops, etc. What they just do is they just give you like 2 random words and be like, what do you think? Like, what do these 2 random words bring to mind, right? And then you try and amalgamate the 2 random words and create other things, or like I don't know. A lot of business ideas are literally like Uber for groceries. Uber for like they use something else and apply what they think about that to something else, and therefore you've created something new. Because you like take this concept over here, add something else into it. Oh, so it's technically something new. Like it's not revolutionary, but it is new. But what else do we have? We got the how we process friends and strangers differently. So we had I mean, this is kind of what we were talking about a bit earlier, wasn't it? With when you have the context of your own culture, you can kind of understand people better. And it's the same with friends and stuff. So like do you find yourself arguing with friends and stuff more? Possibly, but at least you're coming from a perspective of, I kind of know this person, like we have a mutual trust, and therefore we can argue about something, but it's probably for the best for both of us, because we both trust in each other, that we want to like the best for each other. Whereas
you're both invested in the relationship, aren't you?
Yeah. Whereas if you're arguing with a stranger, it's like, I don't really know this person, therefore I have to project onto this person the information I don't have. And I have to create a character in my head, because otherwise I can't argue with somebody I know nothing about. Really, you can't. So you have to like project onto them as much as possible to make it at least like a prototype villain or prototype combateur, I guess you could call it, right? You have to like do that, otherwise you're arguing with nobody. So you have to literally create this person that you're arguing with, because otherwise, and I find it quite interesting, because always I feel like we always succumb back to that sort of like evil villain archetype, or like maybe not evil, but you know what I mean? Like they're a bad person. Like the archetype, especially in an argument, is always like, I'm going to project onto this person that they're the worst, just for fuck knows why. I just will, because that's what a lot of people behave like, isn't it? It's like, you've said this, that means you hate women, you want to hit kids, you are the worst human being. Like, how do you know this? Like, just because somebody texts something doesn't mean they've acted on it, like, or like whatever. Like,
It's just your lack of information, and
they
so
support like they support Trump. Oh, that means they
Yeah.
definitely like fuck kids. It's like what?
Yeah.
Like in what world is this like?
Or the opposite. You do a
Yeah.
behavior, and then it's like, well, they must support Trump, or they're a Trump supporter, right?
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
like, because we need to label the other person. If we don't know much about them, we go off the little information
Yeah.
we do, which is maybe a behavior or
And
a
then we create a
belief.
prototype, and then we like,
Exactly.
we create like an idea of
Exactly.
who they are, and therefore
Yeah.
now you've got somebody you can argue against because now you
Yeah.
kind of know them. But it's interesting because how wrong these prototypes are. Like the stereotypes exist, right? Because I guess at the end of the day, you have to have a way to reduce the world. But when you just take them too far and you just think everybody's a stereotype, that's when you're just like, you've gone crazy at that point.
There's no complexity.
Because everybody's reduced to like 8 different characters. It's just like, oh, everybody's just 8 characters like manifesting their lives around the world. Like, what? There's like 7 billion people, all inherently different. I mean, obviously they all share like similar traits, and at sometimes they might be these villains or whatever you're fucking calling them, but they're also more than that, right? And that's like,
and we tend to assimilate, don't we? It's like once we've given them a label, unless there's new information that tends to be, very contrasting to how we first saw them, then we just assimilate a lot of what they do into the already label that we attributed them.
I find it quite fascinating where, like, for example, you have somebody who you believe to be, I don't know, like a neo-Nazi or whatever, and then you would see them, let's just say, looking after their kids. How do you reconcile these two images? The caring person with this like neo-Nazi who you project onto like the worst desires that wants to destroy the world, whatever.
Yeah.
And the rationalizations people give are crazy. There'll be stuff like, oh yeah, they're just faking it to make you believe that they're nice. Like, do you know what I mean? Like,
yeah, it's so weird.
Maybe they are doing that.
But I think there's also like, I wonder if there's a desire to seem so separate, so you don't see the commonalities in the other person if it's someone that you like. If
you're persecuting somebody, if you're persecuting somebody, you don't want to have any similarities with them, right?
Yeah.
So you kind of want to portray onto them all the evil characteristics, which is why I was saying, I think I said to you ages ago, but like, I believe evil is like a weapon that people use to just like persecute people. It's like they project all the prototype evil characteristics on people, of people who they want to like violently abuse, essentially, to eradicate. Because what can you do with somebody who's just evil, pure evil? All they do is like cause harm and intentionally cause harm. Surely, rationally speaking, they should not exist. Therefore, it justifies killing them. That's where people end up all the time, right? They always end up at that point where it's like, I projected so much bad shit on you that you cannot exist. Because if you exist, like in my mind, the way you exist, I should kill you because I'd be doing the greater good. And that's the classic reason why everybody goes back to this, like, I'm going to do the greater good and I'm going to kill these people. It's just like, well, you've just basically projected onto like a whole population with a load of variety.
You're just thinking.
It's
just think about how dangerous the media can be then, because the whole point of the media is basically to simplify information for the average Joe, right? And so think about it, it's like them talking about something that in reality, if the world wasn't so globalized, we'd probably never even come into contact with. But now they're telling us about it in such a simplified way that we just construct these stereotypes of whatever the fuck they're talking about. But it's kind of dangerous that like most of the stuff that the media talks about, we don't actually kind of like experience, I feel.
Not at all. Like we project
like politics, like, okay, yeah, we're controlled by politics, but we don't actually like confront it or experience it every day in that sense. And it's weird that like, they'll talk about a politician and bam, we'll never meet this person, but we already have like this ingrained belief and stereotype about them.
Well, I think it's just funny more when you actually think about how little you like know about any of these people, yet you seem to think like all of us do. Like all you get told is through like you said, through the lens of the media, and then it depends on what they selectively choose to tell you. So I don't know, you selectively hear the worst usually about people rather than all the good things they've done for their children, because you need somebody to hate, you need somebody to deem, or you need somebody at least to pass judgment on. But the worst thing about all of it is everybody's a bit more complex than that. Or everything's a bit more complex than that in general. But that doesn't sell, mate. It doesn't. People don't like the oldest story in the world is the Bible, but I reckon the older story than that is just evil and good. Like that's it. The only story that people care about is who's good, who's who's bad. The thing that people, I think, slip into very quickly about most people: are they good or are they bad, or some amalgamation of the two? It's kind of how we judge everybody. It literally is. It's the framework of good or bad.
Much. When it's reduced,
when it's reduced down, of course, like there's more, but like underlying it is always that. And that's why I find the Bible quite fascinating, because it is literally like trying to build the good bad story into, like, I don't know, into an actual story with characters and stuff. But yes, let's continue, otherwise we're going to go on forever.
So
I think we're on to arguments happen at different levels.
Yeah.
And we kind of talked about that earlier, which is the idea of like, is the argument happening at a content level, or is it happening at a characterological, like a relationship, like a relationship level? So like, are you arguing now about what you're trying to say, or are you arguing more because you've just insulted them to the point where like they feel like their status has been reduced or whatnot? And that's
precisely. And it's like you can't really hear the other person until you sort out that kind of relationship level, because that kind of comes first. It's like, I always relate this back to a podcast with Douglas Murray, where he said that, if the left and right don't trust each other, then how are they ever going to be able to talk to one another, right? Because if I don't trust you, then why would any word that you say, why would I trust any, why would I listen to any word? Because it's not trustworthy. Right. It's like you have to figure out that relationship level first.
That we have like an intention for a common goal, right? But this is almost why like stuff like the Russian stuff, and like I guess like when JFK was talking about going to space, you arrange a society around a common goal. I feel like war almost unifies a society, because like the common goal is we are together now. I don't care about all the shit we've had in the past. We have an enemy now. So it's almost like the war is like a way of just, a new enemy. So instead of the enemies being each other, it's now this new enemy.
Because it's like, think about it, in 1984, when they're changing who they're at war at. It's like, they're just constantly, it's like, no, we were never at war with that person. We were always at war with this person. But it's always to just like have this, like
it's got to be
common goal. Like,
otherwise, like you said, it's just it's impossible to build that trust. Like,
even if like they don't know anything about that villain, that's what's even weirder, right? Isn't like we're happy to be like, oh yeah, I want to go to war, that scum, everything like that. You've never even been there. You don't even know anyone from that area, and yet they're your villain, because we are just so entrenched in our own kind of like, patriotism. But right, like that's
everybody has their own story. Like I agree. It's I just find it fascinating as well, like you said, when the trust goes down, because it's back to what I was trying to say to you a second ago with the example of somebody who's evil, yet you get conflicting evidence of like, it's like people who hate Trump supporters, and then they can see a Trump supporter like being not acting out of character to what they think they are. So like, let's just say being really nice, or I don't know what they think of them, but like, do you know what I mean? Doing something out of character, they will still rationalize it because there's no trust. There's like, they're putting on a show. They're pretending. It's all an act. And that's what I find, because once that trust is gone, they can never do anything to convince you otherwise. And that's what I think that's fucked about all of this. And that's why you almost do need a war to at least bring these like people back together, to be like, right, stop fucking fighting each other. Because at the moment, people just hate each other in their own country because they don't trust each other. And find somebody else to, put all their angst and worries on and go after them, essentially. It is that like classic like witch hunting, scapegoating thing, isn't it? Like the Rennie Girard, whatever he talks about, right? We always need like an enemy.
Oh yeah.
Like when we don't have an enemy, we find enemies where in your own country.
That's exactly it. Yeah. It's weird.
But without, like you said, without trust, it just doesn't work.
Just destabilizes.
And then so the fact that it's a good point. It goes on to like the challenge and threat states, because like in that sense, I guess you could say, when the trust is gone, it becomes a threat state. So you feel threatened because you cannot trust what this person is saying. They don't have the best intentions for yourself. So you sort of get anxious and you get more angry. Whereas he talks about arguments from a state of a challenge state, which is where it's more like flow, and it's less about, once again, being assaulted, your character being assaulted. It's more about challenging you to come up with an answer to something. So instead of like saying, this is your fault, you fucked this, it's more like, oh, something's gone wrong, how can we fix it? It's just like a different approach to it, and less of like you, so you end up feeling threatened because it's about you. It's more like, how can we do something together? Then it puts you into that frame of mind, which is like problem solving, essentially.
And yeah, like you said, it pretty much is a flow state, isn't it? It's like that's what flow. Chikmikhaliahi. I can't even remember what his
Oh
name
yeah,
is.
mate, I don't even. Yeah,
Mikhali Chikmikhali. I have no
sort
idea.
of that. Mike, is
But
Mike something like is that? Yeah, Mike.
yeah,
Oh mate, oh yeah.
Mikhail Makai. Anyway,
Oh mate, I can't
apologies.
even.
But yeah, no, it is about that. It's like you do need some element of challenge, and it puts you in that kind of flow state. And okay, yeah, like a conflict can come in two different, like you just said, two different forms, whether that's a threat or a challenge. But it was interesting that he was saying that, you know, physiologically there are two different things. They are two different things. You know, it's like there are different physiological symptoms
Yes, it was something to
from
do
a
with like blood
challenge
flow.
state than a yeah,
Wait,
like I reckon both have blood flow. But what was it he said that challenge state involves a measure of anxiety too, but in a
yes,
way that converts into physical and cognitive horsepower, like horsepower. Obviously,
yeah,
that
something to do
phrase
with like when you're in a threat
casual
state, your blood, like your vessels, like become more strict, so therefore there's less blood flow or something like that. I once again, I'm no biologist, but I think you can feel a visceral difference between the
Yeah,
two. Yet they're
yeah,
both like there are similar situations, yet there's a visceral feeling
yeah,
that's different in these two scenarios. One where you're being challenged and one where you're being blamed is two separate feelings. And I'm for sure
yeah,
people must have experienced that in life. If you think of a time where you were blamed, these a time where you were asked something which was more productive rather than being like, it's your fault. It's more like something's gone wrong. How do we fix it? Ask yourself how you would feel. And I think just even a simple mind experiment would let you realize that that is a different feeling.
yeah, exactly. And I think that also, you know, if you trust the person that you're talking to, and you feel that both of you have a common goal, whether that's truth or whatnot, but if you're both invested in it, then you don't feel as helpless, do you? Because you think that they're also trying to get to that solution. Whether,
Yeah.
okay, yeah, maybe you may be arguing, but the fact is both of you believe in that goal. And so I think that's probably like, you know, that is the challenge state, because it's like, okay, now I've got someone on my side, and although we may have opposing views, we're both trying to get to the same goal here.
Yeah.
Whereas
But
like when you're being attacked, it's like, look, this, you know, it's a threat because no one else is with me, so I need to like fight or
yeah,
flight,
yeah.
you know, that kind of
I
response.
believe there was something similar in the How to Have Impossible Conversations, which wasn't worded quite like that, but it was more this like, you know, framing this whole thing as a mutual mutual understanding of each other rather than as a fight. Like we're not fighting here. I'm just trying to understand you, and you're just trying to help me understand you. Like it's not, you know, it's we're in this together. Like I'm not, you know, I'm not persecuting here. I just want to know like why you believe the things you do.
Yeah, no, exactly. So the next bit is
Yes.
reason.
Yeah, as an argumentation.
Yeah.
Like reason. Yeah, I've seen this. By the way, I don't know about you, but I've seen this come up in a few different books now. This like I still haven't read the book by Hugo Mercier and Dan Sperber. I can't remember the name. What's the book called? I think it's called The
I
Enigma
don't
of
know.
Reason.
Is that the one?
But yeah, they basically hypothesize that reason evolved to basically argue. Reason evolved to basically tell others in a social sort of group why you acted in a way you did. So like the whole point we sort of learn how to sort of do a chain of things is to basically explain, I did this, then this happened, then this happened, this happened. So you can justify to a group why something happened, or maybe even explain, you know, you went out hunting or foraging, and therefore you could re-explain to them the steps potentially.
Yeah.
Which is
Exactly.
quite,
And I think
I don't know how you'd ever prove it, but
no, yeah, it would be very difficult. But like it was interesting because he delineates it from like because people think that people thought, and probably still think, but that reason was for truth. But the thing
yes,
is, we can still reason even when something isn't true. So that can't really
yes,
be the case. So it
yes,
must
yeah,
be like kind of a subjective adaptation, right? And an ability to tell you how you behaved. Then someone says, "Oh no, but I did it this way," and
yeah,
then you start having this argument to find out what the best way is, right?
yeah.
But like it's almost evolved as like a collective
Yeah,
mechanism to
it's
kind
interesting
of
because yeah, it evolved individually, but actually the benefits are more collective because like you
exactly,
can all reason, but only when reason becomes into conflict with each other can you start creating more than
yeah,
just your own like line of thinking, right? Like
precisely.
it's hard to explain. I guess you could argue like we said earlier about creativity, everything comes from this conflict of ideas. Like, I don't know, let's just say you're the first person to attack a wolf and you came back and went, fuck, I hit it with a stick and it wasn't, going through. And somebody goes, oh, by the way, I used this sharp object and I cut something. It's like, oh, put them together. Oh, fucking hell, I've got a spear. And then it's like, and the next thing you go, oh, wait, I've got a tree, I've got a string. Oh, wait, got a bow. You gotta, like, obviously they didn't do it quite like that, but you kind of get the whole. It's something where, like, somebody puts an idea forward, somebody puts something forward, like information, and somebody else can build on it. Or even if it's like social gossip as well, like, oh, I saw this person doing that. Oh yeah, wow, I thought they weren't like that, but they've just stolen all our food. Like, it works in many different ways, but it's kind of like a social adaptation as well.
Yes. No, absolutely.
And then 9 rules of productive disagreement. So this was actually I think is worth probably saying as well, probably a bit late to say it, but the first part of the book was more explaining like why we should argue, why we don't argue, why we even have like you said, like we just said about rationality, why arguing even came about. And then the second part was more like rules based upon how to argue productively. And he basically used, I think, 9 separate chapters with like 9 headings, which are pretty self-explanatory, and then sort of explored them. We've kind of just got the chapter headings and the names, and then we'll try and explain the context behind it. So the first one was first connect. So before getting to the content of disagreement, you must establish a relationship of trust, which I feel like we've probably done some level of justice to explaining why that would be the case. Because, if you can't trust somebody, then you can't really even put forward your own argument, because if you don't trust somebody, you're not going to trust that they're going to listen to it. You're not going to trust that they're going to even, reply in a way that's positive, etc.
Exactly. You need to be able to build rapport, and like, so that it's like loosening the gates, isn't it? So that then you can talk about all this content, but at first you have to be able to acknowledge that the other person is a fucking human being and that they are capable of hearing what you're going to say.
There's a reason why most meetings start with a bit of small talk first, right? It's not like, it's pretty rude to just go straight into like what you're doing. It's establishing some trust, establishing mutual goals, I guess, could be another way of putting it. Like the reason why you're even, if it's like a meeting, let's just say it's a formal business meeting, like establishing the reason why you're all there and why it's, you're all collectively involved in the thing that you're about to discuss.
Yeah, and I think, like, he throughout the book he constantly used like interrogation or police work or hostage situations as kind of examples, which are all obviously like very extreme, but obviously he extrapolates that to like the average person, the average conversation. But I do think that he was giving examples of how like an interrogator would try and identify with the culprit or the perpetrator first by just relating to him somehow. Maybe he's doing maybe he's having he has like a similar behavior. Maybe they're drinking the same coffee. Maybe they both have kids. It's something very simplistic, but it means that I'm not just seen as a police officer now, right? I'm not just a label. I'm giving you more information and how that information is similar to you, right? So you can see me as someone who's like relatable, who's similar. So that then you can start to like loosen that grip and start to actually talk about the content that you want to talk about. But it is, I think, about first identifying a level of trust, a level of like relatability, so that you can just talk to one another as a human being.
No, 100%. I do like the idea as well, what you're saying about giving them added information so they don't just like stereotype you immediately. It's like, hey, like, I may be this whatever you think I am, like a policeman, but I'm also, a human, and I have the same.
I'm a dad.
Desires.
Yeah, exactly.
And we both have that in common. And then the second, let go of the rope. So to disagree well, you have to give up on trying to control what the other person thinks and feels. So I guess this once again is like another, I guess you could call it meta trait to a degree, but it's trying to realize that you can never really truly control what people think and feel of you, like regardless. And it's kind of trying to let go of the impressions you're trying to leave. Like if you really want this person to think of you in a specific way, you need to realize that that's like a goal you can never control to a degree. I mean, you can influence it for sure, But at the end of the day, the person in front of you is going to decide what they think regardless. So it's kind of one of those things you kind of need to just accept that it's not always going to be the way you want it to be, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. Like the metaphor is you're giving them slack, aren't you? So that they have like freedom to express themselves. They've just, you've just kind of established a level of trust or whatnot. You're building a bit of rapport. You're giving them this freedom to try and act in a way that they want to, because you're working on their behalf in a sense, if you think about it. Okay. You get to gauge what, where they want to go, what they want to talk about, blah, 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 so that you can kind of follow them in that direction rather than you being like, no, you have to do it this way, where it's too constricting. And if you do that, well, then they're not going to want to talk to you. And like, there was a good point that he said here. It's like, if you want someone to tell the worst way to get someone to share a secret is to tell them to do it. And there is that. It's like, you have to allow them to be genuinely interested or invested in this conversation. You can't manufacture that, It's like it's got to come from them. And then once you kind of gauge that kind of their behavior or their direction that they're going in, then you can kind of respond accordingly, right? But you can't just construct everything. Like, because if you could, then you just make them say, yeah, I agree with you. But then what's the fucking point of having a conversation? Like,
yeah. 100%. I quite like that. What did you say? What was the phrase you took from the book? So if you want somebody to say a secret,
to get someone to share a secret is
to ask directly for it, right? You tell me your secret. Like, yeah, you're right.
Yeah, tell me you agree with me. Like,
yeah.
It doesn't make any sense. So like, you have to allow them.
People resent that. Yeah, people resent that like level of constriction, etc.
Yeah.
And then 3 is give face. So the disagreements become toxic when they become status battles. The skillful disagreeer makes every effort to make the adversary feel good about themselves. I mean, that's pretty much what we talked about earlier about this characterological stuff. It's, essentially don't insult somebody, but also at the same time reflect back to them the person they want to be.
Exactly. And like, he did have like a very good example for this. I thought he used Mandela as like an example of how he was talking to his rivals, like accumulated an army of 100,000 men. And, he invited him around for tea and he was talking to him. And obviously this guy is a revered general, he's like had a lot of like, been in a lot of military situations and had a lot of military experience. And so he treated him as such. Like, we all have an idea of how we see ourselves. We have certain personas. And, the best way to kind of get along with someone is to give them that persona. And he did that. And he was like, look, you are this person. You're an Afrikaans. You're a general, blah, blah, blah. And you play to that. You don't kind of diminish them or make them feel little by like being like, oh, You respect
like their position, right? Like you respect where they've got to, especially if there's somebody like that. I remember that was an incredible story, wasn't it? He like invited him over for tea and managed to like basically convince him not to go to war.
Yeah.
Off the back of just basically showing him respect, wasn't it? And he was like so shocked that somebody could give him so much respect in the fact that he's behaved.
The enemy, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's crazy. I do remember that. That was quite a big, quite an impactful bit of the book.
Yeah, I thought so.
And then number 4, check your weirdness. So behind many disagreements is a clash of cultures that seem strange to each other. Don't assume that yours is the normal one. And that's I think he took the weird from the classic Western educated industrial, isn't it? Like what I can't remember the R stands for.
Fuck, I should know this. I do psychology.
Democratic was the
D
third.
is democratic. R is
racist.
Radicalized.
Yeah. Western educated, industrialized.
Fuck. What?
Something democratic.
This is embarrassing.
But you have a little look because I'm also
actually going to type this in because this is bottom.
I bet it's gonna be so obvious as well. It's gonna be so obvious.
Yeah. God, we sound like so stupid. It is rich.
Okay. Rich. Oh yes.
That's why we didn't get it. Oh God.
Oh, of course. Why didn't we guess that?
Kill
Like,
me. Oh
oh my fuck.
Jesus.
We're
Um,
yeah. Oh, such a funny.
yes. So basically, that is a lot of what a lot of science is done in terms of a lot of the samples that are used are done on a weird sample. That's where he's getting this weirdness from. And the idea being like we presume that the Western, ideology is the only right ideology, which may not be correct. And sometimes when we're talking to someone who exhibits a different kind of culture or a different ideology, think about it as if yours is also weird. That
Yeah.
like there isn't a right ideology, and that you just have a different way
Like,
of
yeah.
viewing the world. And so to try and match that, or to try and get on their level, you have to try and understand where they're coming from and how they see the world. And there was a good example as well. It was talking about these hostages of these Davidians. It was like this guy in America who basically had like a church and a bunch of followers. It was a bit of a cult, but basically they thought that God was going to act in a certain way, and so they were more fearful of that than all of the like hostage negotiators and all the FBI that was surrounding them. And the FBI couldn't compute that because they're like, well, obviously, God doesn't exist, and like we're the biggest thing here, like and they couldn't compute that, and so they couldn't like negotiate.
Didn't they get really bad in the end? And they all killed everybody
Yeah,
or
it did.
something.
Yeah,
They
they all
like,
got like
yeah.
killed, yeah.
Oh fucking
But
hell. Yeah, I remember reading that as well. That was yeah, just goes to show, right, isn't it? When you're just not communicating, you're just at a completely different wavelength.
Yeah.
When they're talking about God, and you just think, because obviously they just didn't believe in God. They're just like, why should you care? Like, we are the power here. Like, you should be like, bowing down to us. But like, they're playing by a different rule, different game. Sorry, they're just
exactly. And that's why it kind of goes on very well to the next point, which is like be curious, right? Is like
yes,
if there is some like mismatch here, if there is a discrepancy between like how you both view the world, you both have different cultural
yeah.
differences.
What exactly? Why aren't you curious if somebody completely sees it differently, right? Like,
Exactly. You've got to be able to try and understand where they're coming from, how they see the world, what are their cultural differences, so that you can talk to them, so that you can, actually argue properly and get to some kind of consensus or solution. But you have to
exactly.
be curious. You have to engage and genuinely like you want to learn from them, which you should do. And if you're like part of like a bigger goal, which is truth, or like what's the right ideology, I don't know. But if you want to get to that point, you have to be curious and try and
100%.
find out.
And that's another one that's pretty staple across all the communication books. Is like the meta trait is to try and get in a mindset of like, what, how can this person believe what they believe, and trying to genuinely be curious about the answer.
Yeah, no, exactly. It was quite interesting as well. Wasn't he saying that? So to be curious, to engage the parts of the brain that like are responsible for being curious, it requires more like energy, more mental resources.
Yeah,
And
doesn't
so
surprise me,
hence,
because you
no,
got to
it
leave
doesn't.
it. You got to leave the judgment open, so you have to take more information in my head. Like, if you can judge somebody
Exactly.
immediately, or like be like, oh, he's just an idiot, it's done. Thinking's done. I don't have to listen to him
Yeah.
anymore. But if
Yeah.
you're somebody who's like, how could this guy be right, or like, why does he think? You've asked yourself a question, you have to take in more information to try and figure out what's going on, right? So
Yeah.
in my head, that would be why you would use more energy.
Yes. No, exactly. But it just means that like it's very easy to just resort to not being curious, isn't it? It's something that's
of course,
active. You have to have like be intentionally curious about it, kind of.
especially if you're like, I guess if you're more tired or something or whatever, it's people just want to shut off at that point, I guess, or like yeah. And then the next rule, I think, is make wrong strong, which in fact, let me just read it from it. Probably makes it easier. Mistakes can be positive if you apologize rapidly and authentically. They enable you to show humility, which can strengthen the relationship and ease the conversation. So basically, I can't remember the example you gave in the book, but it's like, if you say something that's wrong, basically apologize for it immediately, and it kind of then shows the person you're having an argument with that you are, first of all, open to being wrong, but at the same time you're sort of I guess developing a level of trust, which is like, I'm open to also like being fallible, which is essentially being wrong. But like, what else was there from that? Being wrong, the which is a conversation. Yeah, and it sets a precedent that they could be wrong too, or that they can open up and admit their own mistakes.
Yeah,
which I think is really important.
Wasn't that also in How to Have Impossible Conversations? It's like,
yes, it was.
If you're the first one to like open up and be like, oh, I could be wrong, then it allows them to feel free.
It was literally using a phrase similar to that. It was something like, even saying like, oh, I used to believe this, or at least then it shows that you're somebody who's willing to change your mind or whatever, or like something that you were wrong about. Like, I used to believe that I was doing this, and this, and then something happened, and I was like, oh, and then I got made to look like an idiot. But
it kind of humbles you, and then like brings you down, like grounds you a bit. So it's like, oh, you're not just trying to, you're not just seeing this person as a win, or like or it depends what like your job is, but like, as like a job, if you're a policeman or an interrogator, it seems more genuine that you're actually having a conversation. And I think there was also, sorry, go on.
No, go. No, you go, mate.
I was just going to say, we talked about this before the recording, but I think he was saying that a lot of interrogators, they use like mistakes as like a jumping board to jump onto something else, because it provides, there's a reaction from the other person, which is like, means they're putting more investment into this conversation, and that's more like mental resources. They're more invested, and then so you use that to try and jump onto something else. So yes, like when you own your own mistake, it's like you've gone to another level in that relationship. You've overcome a little conflict, a little hurdle, and now you're both more invested in it. If you go over.
For sure. And I think it's especially important in relationships which are hierarchical. So like if you're a business leader and you can admit your own mistakes, it sets 100%. A new precedent. Like it's less important for somebody who's lower down, in the sense that missing your own mistake can almost be seen as a form of weakness, I guess. So once again, this is like a context dependent tactic, to be honest. But no, like from people with like, I guess even like in an interrogation, like you're saying, it's the interrogator has the power and the hierarchy's there, like, and for them to admit their own, like, fallibility, it's it sets a good sort of standard for like how the conflicts or how the conversation is going to go. It enables a bit more trust, I guess. And then
the next one was disrupt the script.
Yes.
I'll read from here. It says, hostile arguments get locked into simple and predictable patterns. To make the disagreement more productive, introduce novelty and variation. Be surprising.
Yeah, we were kind of talking about this earlier, weren't we? Where like even surprising being like just like screaming. Maybe less so that, but like even just doing something like that will at least flip people out of their like, the rut you're in. If you're arguing about the same thing again and again and again, it's like doing something different to try and get yourselves out of that sort of the same pattern, so to speak.
Yes. Yeah, because I think sometimes you can get locked in a bit, especially if there's like a negative something negative, like that's being interjected, something like maybe like attacking the person, because then it becomes, think about it, if you're talking about the content, right? But you can only talk about the content if the relationship level is fine. If someone suddenly goes, no, that's stupid, right? It kind of attacks the relationship level, and then it's just like a continuous cycle until that gets repaired, and then you can go back to the content. But a lot of the time it just spirals and spirals and spirals. And so you need sometimes to interject and like put something kind of new in, so that kind of disrupts that cycle and like maybe jumps onto a different topic, so that it's, or like repairs that kind of relationship level. And I think we've all had like kind of conversations where it seems like you're saying the same thing over again, over and over again. It's like something's broken and it hasn't been fixed yet.
Yeah, no, 100%. You just need to get yourself out of that sort of same pattern by just doing something or saying something a bit different, which gets them sort of thinking outside of the box, so to speak. Like we were talking earlier about like saying like, what would your mum think of like this conversation? Just like anything to just get somebody to just transition their mind away from the current conversation, or to keep within the current conversation but have like a new spin on it. It's classic, isn't it? It's like there's like proven studies with like creativity where it's like, pretend you're this person, how would you approach the problem? And how it makes people genuinely shift their thinking about anything. So you got a problem in front of you. It's like, pretend you're Elon Musk. How would you solve this? And people all of a sudden approach things differently. It's like, well, why wouldn't you even think about that in the first place. It's crazy.
No, exactly. And then that kind of ties in with the next point, which is share constraints. So the other one is like, I think it's like, you know, when it does get into a predictable pattern or you get stuck, you need to introduce novelty and variation. This one is kind of like you're imposing rules a little bit. So it says what disagreements benefit from a set of agreed norms and boundaries that support expression. Rules create freedom. And it kind of ties in a lot with creativity, as in, you know, if you just have boundless freedom, well, then where do you even start? Because everything's possible, which means nothing's possible. You kind of need to, you know, have some rules to set the boundaries, so that then you can think of all the possibilities within those boundaries, right? And I think if you guys both know where you're acting on, the same thing what you were talking about, I think earlier when you were saying, you know, let's agree on the definition of something. If you're having a conversation, those are some of the rules that you're setting so that you can figure out and have a conversation better.
You could even do stuff like, you know, the rules are you let me speak for 30 seconds, I let you speak for 30 seconds. And that way you don't have that classic where people just shout over each other like, no, like you can't say that. Like it's like you see it on television, don't you? When you get like people debating and they're like cutting over each other. It's like, shut the fuck up, you're both adults. Like just let each other speak, man. Like it's crazy. It's but like that's what I mean. You need those level of like, these are the rules, we're gonna play by them, because otherwise this is gonna turn into some sort of, you know, mess to a degree.
No, absolutely.
And then number 9, only get mad on purpose. So no amount of theorizing can fully prepare us for the emotional experience of disagreement. Sometimes your worst adversary is yourself. And that the point being, if you get angry, you're going to, I guess, I was going to say lose strategic advantage, but you're not going to argue in a way that's productive. So his point is, you know, only be angry if you're doing it on purpose to convey, like, you know, how much you care about something, essentially, is the rule. Obviously, once again, like all these rules, especially this one, to be honest, it's a lot easier said than done, especially if somebody says something to you that's, you know, which really sort of grinds your gears. But at the same time, it is one of the rules which in my head is probably one of the most important as well. Because if you lose your head, you're going to lose the argument, or not lose the argument, but you're going to turn the argument into something which is less productive than it's meant to be.
Precisely. And like, I think there was a good point that he brought up in terms of figure out what triggers you, right? Like, because he was talking about like policemen, and they were saying like each of them has like a different trigger where their like partners had to step in and like, you know, shut them down. And like one of them was like, you know, when children are like present, and, you know, he saw like one guy who only spent like money on beer, and there were just cockroaches all around. The kid was like just watching TV and it was disgusting. And like, you know, that triggered him. And there was another one where I can't remember what so
that sounds pretty horrendous. That would have triggered me.
And that's the thing, is like, if you can ahead of time figure out what those triggers are, then like, you know, there's whole exposure therapy and all that kind of stuff to kind of reduce that. But it's better to know how your environment impacts you. Right?
Yeah, 100%.
Going into just, you know,
at least then you have like a plan around it.
Precisely. So yeah, and it's like you said, it's so much harder than you think it is, because when you're emotional, it's hard to think.
And it's also because you're rarely in these situations, so it's quite hard to practice. Do you know what I mean? It's like, how would you practice this stuff? Unless, of course, you're like in a really emotional argument, which, you know, not everybody's in every day to day. So it's more like these are very rare, few and far between. It's like, how can you compose yourself in the way that's best possible when it's just like slam punch you in the gut and you're not really thinking, oh, wow, what was the Wise Words podcast saying on that day? It's not the first thing that comes to your mind. You're too busy like, this guy just called me a douche. I'm going to go after them.
Exactly. And it's weird because, like, I think I read it I first came across it in Ross Edgley's book, but this idea of like training at competition level, right? The whole idea is that you want to train at a competition level so that when you are in a competition environment, that you're more prepared for it. And I can't remember where I read this. I have no idea which book it was, but it was talking about this woman who was a martial arts like champion. Okay. And then one day she got like stopped, or like, I think she got raped or something. And and she couldn't comprehend how she didn't, how, like, you know, she's a martial arts champion, how she
Yes,
couldn't get out
okay,
of it.
yes, yeah.
I think it might have been like Shattered Assumptions, actually.
I
And the
want to
whole
say
idea
what,
was
yeah,
that, like,
yeah.
it's different operating under a sense of like fear or
Or
stress
stress, yeah,
compared to
100%.
just always operating in, like, you know, an empty dojo, for example, right? And
Yeah, yeah.
and I think that goes for saying this is like, you know, yeah, we can say theorizingly that, you know, just don't be angry,
Yeah,
but
like, yeah,
actually
no,
it
well, I
takes
guess it's,
experience,
yeah, I was
right?
supposed to say, it's funny you say that because, like, obviously everybody knows from common sense that being angry is not a good way to do it. Yeah, everybody
Yeah,
gets angry. So that
yeah,
just goes to show you the problem, right? Like,
yeah,
we know not what to not do, yet we still can't do it.
yeah,
So, yeah,
precisely.
it's worth thinking about that.
And then I think the last one is the golden rule, which is
Be real.
be real.
Yeah.
So being genuine, which I think, you know, I think it goes to say that, you know, you can follow all these rules, but actually if you don't follow this one, then none of them make any sense, or, you know, none of them work, because you have to be genuine. The other person has to believe that
Yeah,
you
they're
actually
genuine.
care about them and their beliefs and
Because
their
once the trust,
thoughts.
yeah, like, yeah, if the trust isn't there, it's game over, isn't it? Like we said before, you can't
Exactly.
even argue because they'll just immediately assume
Yeah.
anything you're saying is either trash or just like you're trying to manipulate them.
Yeah.
So the game's already done before you even start. So it's,
Yeah. You can't start rule one if
yeah,
you don't even start the golden rule, you know.
yeah,
It has to be genuine. So yeah.
exactly. Then we just got a bunch of things here like the principles and the techniques. So I think we can. Some of them are very similar. We touched on before. I believe, if I'm correct, these were kind of done post hoc. So these are just principles taken from the book. So the first principle we got was people don't just speak; they express emotions. So when people express ideas. They're doing more than just that. They're expressing their emotions, and it's sometimes the emotions that are just, you know, they want to be heard. So sometimes it's not even worth listening to the words, listening to the emotion behind it,
Yeah.
which I thought was relatively. I want to say I've seen that similar idea before. Can't remember where, but yeah, like, there's more to people's words than, you know, meets the eye. I think it might have been like, I don't know if you've read it. Like there's a book, games people play and stuff like that. I don't know if you've heard of it, but like
Yeah.
it's a psychologist, Eric Bryan, I think, or something like that.
Okay.
But he was always claiming that, like, even the way people behave, there tends to be something underlying it anyway, like an emotion underlying it, whether it's, you know, the need for like love or reassurance. So people would even say stuff indirectly to try and get other things, right? So it's sometimes trying to listen to
Yeah.
the emotion behind the words rather than the words themselves, you know.
Yeah,
If
I
somebody
think so.
says
It's
to you,
like,
like, what do you think of me? Like, they might be asking directly for the answer, but at the same time, they're probably asking for reassurance. So it's like the
yeah,
emotion there is like reassurance rather than, you know, oh yeah, you're all right. It's not going to cut the chase at those types of times.
yeah,
But
precisely. Yeah, it's quite interesting, like, because I can relate to my acting, where the methodology that I follow or that I resonate with, they use a metaphor of like a river and a canoe, and the canoe is the words and the river is the like emotion and the tone. And it's like, you know, the words are like a reflection of what's going on underneath the rapids and all that kind of stuff, which, you know, insinuate the anger and stuff like that. But I think, yeah, most of it is like the subtext. It's the emotion underneath that
yeah,
allows us to talk about like whatever kind of belief or thought that we have. But yeah, there's normally a lot more depth to what people say.
yeah, to what people say, yeah, 100%. And then another principle of the communication was combat your writing reflex. And the overview of the writing reflex, I guess, is when you are listening to somebody speak about their problems or whatever, it's this idea of like jumping in to try and correct them without, you know, hearing what they have to say. So I think it mainly came across from people's traditional addiction therapy, where counselors would just basically jump in to fix people before they've even been heard. So it's like, you know,
Yeah,
you start speaking, they're like, that's, you know, this is what you need to do. Like they offer advice before they know everything. And so a principle of, you know, communicating and arguing correctly would be, you know, withhold the need to offer advice until, you know, you got to that point and just listen,
yeah,
essentially.
and be curious once again, isn't it? It's like
Yeah.
it's very Jungian actually, like the whole idea that don't go in trying to treat someone, you know,
Yeah,
that
yeah.
everyone's a patient. It's like, or that you know what is right. Once again, it's the cultural differences. It's like you have to be curious because you don't know if you're always going to be right. So you can't go into a situation trying to correct everyone.
Yeah, especially by like correct what in your eyes, like what's correct, like what's
Yeah,
right, what's
exactly.
wrong, and it's down to the individual, right? Like for the person who comes to you with an addiction for something, what's right is the addiction, like what's right, or maybe it's not right, but it's not completely wrong because they would have stopped in a weird way in that sense.
Yeah, yeah.
And then another one, so another principle we got is to look for others' public faces. So similar to what we were saying earlier, which is like saving people's face. It's more look for the the personas people want to project. I don't know if they're like a celebrity for a specific reason, or if they have like a they're very career orientated. Make sure you reflect back to them that the prestige they've won from their career, etc. So it's basically giving people, basically recognizing people for who they see themselves as, which is going to make sure arguments go a lot better. Because as we said that earlier, if you mischaracterize somebody, they're going to have an immune body response to it, like, oh, I'm not like that, like you've completely got me wrong, etc.
Yeah. And then that's where that rule, what does it make errors strong?
Yes, make strong. Strong makes wrong. Wrong makes strong.
Yeah. It's like admitting your mistakes and
make wrong strong. There you go.
Yes, exactly.
So yeah, you're right. You could be like, "Whoops, I'm really sorry. I didn't mean to say that about yourself. I can I completely mischaracterized you. I'm sorry." And then all of a sudden,
I think the more kind of like human like you make yourself, in a sense, that we all make mistakes, and that, like, once again, it's like if I can make mistakes, you can make mistakes, right? It's opening up that ability and that freedom for them to admit stuff as well.
No, for sure, mate. It's like the humble, like you've set the precedent for the relationship. You've set the precedent that you're willing to showcase this like side of yourself that's more vulnerable, and therefore you, by proxy, invite them to do the same. And whether or not they take that, that's up to them. But at least you set the standard of which they can follow, or they don't have to. At least you're not forcing it. But you're definitely more likely to get it out of them by doing that than like the secret thing, than telling them to be more vulnerable. It's like, okay, good luck.
Accept my mistake.
Yeah, literally.
Yeah.
And then another one, individuals as microcultures, and this is a bit like the weird point, to be honest. It's basically seeing everybody as their own mini microculture. Allows you to realize that we're all different.
Unique
micro environment, so to speak. Yeah, microculture is probably the better word yet. That's another principle. And then I think the last one here is watch your tone. So often tone is more important than the content. So be careful when you're saying things. If you're saying them aggressively, it's never going to go down too well. And just be aware of the way you're expressing yourself, because things get taken in a way that they're said, not just in the what is said.
Exactly. And I think it also ties in with the rule of being genuine. It's like, if you are being genuine, your tone kind of reflects that, because you are genuinely interested. And so you wouldn't be trying to attack the other person's character unless you genuinely want to attack their character. But I don't think that's actually but it's like, I genuinely fucking hate you.
Oh, at least you said the truth, I guess.
Exactly. No, but tone is very important, because once again, it's like what we pick up in the background, the implicit meaning behind things, which we're adapted to do.
And then we move on to techniques, which so the first one is label emotions to get them out in the open. So this is like, so if you can see somebody who's visibly angry, you say something like, I can see you're furious about that. And then you often elicit responses like, damn straight, like I shouldn't have to tell you. So once somebody does that, they kind of can relax, because it's, the emotion is now out on the table. You, like, both people know they're angry. Whereas I guess if somebody responds angrily to you and you don't kind of like acknowledge it, it kind of like gets buried, if that makes sense. So like if somebody says to you something really aggressive, you'd be like, fuck, like you seem really angry. They're like, yeah, I'm fucking angry. And then you'd be like, okay, well, now we know. They almost relax in a weird way.
Well, I think they also, it re-emphasizes their connection with you, doesn't it?
Like you perceived, fine, you perceived it correctly, right? Yes, yeah.
It's like, I can see that you're angry. It's like, I'm on the same wavelength as you. I get you. I can see where you're coming from, rather than just like still asking fucking questions. Like,
yeah. Like, yeah, you're right. Like a customer service, like somebody shouting at you, and instead of saying, "I can see you're angry," it's more just like, "But what is, like, what about this? What about this?" It's like they're obviously getting more and more angry. So like, I can see you're really angry. Like, too random fucking angry.
And I think a lot of people end up acting in a way that is like telling them what to do. Once again, it's like, calm down, or like, why are you so angry? You know, it's like, and once again, it's like, why are you so angry? That comes across in tone, right? I could be like, look, why are you so angry? It's very different. But I think
I just want to understand why. What's made you so angry? Like, you're right. Like, why are you so angry? It's almost got like an implicit judgment by the tone.
And people want to be heard. They want to know that you get them. If you're like, look, I can see that you're angry. I'd love to know why. It's a lot better than just like, stop being so angry. Like, you're just gonna make them more fucking angry.
Stop. Like, it's one of the worst things. Like, calm. Yeah, like you say, calm down.
Calm down.
What do you mean, calm down? Like, don't
it's you like, I'm not calm for a fucking reason. You think I'm gonna calm down now?
Yeah. It's actually interesting because I feel like the approach of it, like you seem angry. It's like, I'm fucking angry. At least I'm for saying it. Like in my head, if I think through, like if I was in a situation like that, I would almost feel way more calm. Just be like, yes, I'm fucking angry. I just feel like at least it's like, it's interesting.
But actually, it's weird because this is very much along the lines of some of the like exercises that I do. Is like my acting thing, is because the whole idea is like, obviously you want to be in tune to the implicit context, right? Not necessarily the words. The words are a reflection of your emotion, all that kind of stuff. But you want to be picking up on how the person actually feels so that you can respond accurately. I know if you're fucking angry because of the tone of your voice, right? Not necessarily because of the words that you're saying. And so you do this exercise where it's like, I might be like, you've got brown eyes. I'm like, I've got brown eyes. You've got brown eyes. Now, maybe you were fucking bullied for having brown eyes. I don't know why you were, but then your response might be like, I've got brown eyes. And I'm like, you're annoyed. And then you'll be like, I'm annoyed. And the whole idea is like picking up on subtle, like kind of nuances in the context rather than not the actual words. And it's the same thing. It's like, picking up on people that are fucking angry and dealing with that, not what they're fucking saying. Be like, look, mate, I can see that you're fucking angry. Okay. Like, I get that. It's like, let's not beat around the bush here. Okay. Like, let's try and solve that and figure out why you are.
I can see what works, right? It's it's good.
Well,
good
I'm
little...
not an actor yet, but
it's a good little technique.
Yeah.
And then next one is that one we covered many times before: summarizing others' thoughts. So like summarizing what they've just said to you. We've covered this in, I think, Crucial Conversations. Pretty much every single communication book, it's repeat back to other people what they've said. Exactly. So they know they've been heard. I quite like this next one. The framing new information is intriguing. So like, if somebody says something to you like that you've never heard before, you'd be like, "Oh, I didn't know that," or like, "Wow, that's really interesting. Like, can you tell me more?" It's also quite a way. It's like quite a good way of eliciting more information for something you don't necessarily agree with. So somebody says something like, let's just say somebody says something which you see as outrageous because you just think, how the hell can somebody believe that? You should probably respond with, wow, like, that's really interesting. I've never heard that before. Like, how, tell me more, rather than basically like, what the fuck do you believe that? Like, where have you read that?
No, exactly. Yeah, I think it is, because it also shows that you're curious once again, right?
Yeah. For sure. And the last one I've got here of the techniques is flip the script, which is pretty much what we covered earlier. So using like something which gets them thinking outside of the box, so to speak. Like anything. If you were this person, how would you be thinking about it? Or if your mum was here, what would she say? I don't know. Anything which gets.
I think there was a good. Wasn't there a point in it that he was saying people are much more likely to take on board what you say if it's actually in different language? Okay. I think he said that. I can't remember what part, but he was saying that like people take it on board. Language. Yeah, because first of all, it's novel, right? And you're still talking about the same issue, but maybe using a different vocabulary from, I don't know, a different realm of, if I was talking about maybe something psychological, I could use biological or, economical kind of vocabulary. Do you get what I mean? So people will be like, oh, okay, I've never seen that. I never thought of it that way.
I think that's, I guess this is just a classic reframing.
Yeah.
To a degree, it's just
classic.
like, repackaging it using different language, and then maybe, making them think about it in a different way. Essentially it.
Exactly.
I think, well, that's all the content. I don't know if, because we haven't done this in so long, do you want to do like a recap,
we could do a little,
recap? More maybe more like, what did we do before? It was something like
actual ideas kind of things.
Yeah.
Or
we could do an actual ideas. I mean, for me, the actual ideas were the techniques in my head. Like, an actual idea is, label somebody's emotion the next time you see it. So like next time you're with somebody and they're sad, you'd be like, you seem really sad, or, you seem really angry.
Well, I think, obviously this book is basically cut into two parts. It's just why conflict is important, why we need to argue, in terms of like, how conflict brings us together, how it makes us smarter, how it inspires us. And that's kind of like evident in terms of, it's very synergistic. Okay. You need two people to create a new idea, and have like some overarching goal that both of you are invested in, so that you can get to some kind of conclusion. And it's not all about you. It's not egocentric. If it is about you, you can tell that it's all still on the relationship level and you haven't solved stuff yet. Right. Okay, as in like, it's still, you're attacking the person rather than the point that he's talking about. And then obviously there's the 9 rules that we went over, which were all about how to have a productive argument.
I guess you could say like the principles of having a productive argument. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
To be honest, I don't really know how to even summarize it. To be honest, you could just pre-package it up into the 9 different ideas. I think it's pretty much summarized as is. I guess once again, like you're saying, if you're going to do like a key takeaway, it would just be like, we need to argue more. Productively, I think, is the way we should, or productive. We need to have productive disagreements more. It's the key takeaway, because disagreements in general are actually beneficial, especially in team-based, objective-based situations, relationship situations as well. I would say, obviously, useful.
Yeah, exactly. If we do, it's okay. So rules, the first one, obviously connect, establish an element of trust so that you can actually see the other person. You feel comfortable to communicate with them. The second is giving them a bit of freedom so that they can, explore and act how they would like to. And then you can start, treating them how they want to be seen. So giving them face, whatever persona they want to embody, you can give them that. It makes them feel respected, that they're being respected, and that you're respectful, and that they're seeing you. All of this is to build trust so that they can talk to you. I think also then there's the next one, which is check your weirdness. So don't assume that your opinion is right, or your culture or ideology is right, that everyone kind of is unique.
Everybody's their own microculture.
Exactly. And so there will naturally be differences. And so if you want to be able to communicate with that person, you need to engage. And this is the next rule. Curiosity. You need to be curious about that. You need to be able to understand where they're coming from, their perspective of the world, so that the more you know about them, the more you can try and understand how they operate, how they see the world, and how you can kind of get your opinion across. Now, naturally, there's always going to be mistakes, and you're always going to like have conflict naturally. But when you do make mistakes, then that's when you need to kind of own them, make wrong strong. That's the next rule. It's basically owning your mistakes, so that you're seen more, you're kind of humbled, and you can use that as, a way to let the other person also come forward with their mistakes or own their mistakes. Then the next one is disrupt the script. So basically when you get stuck in a little cycle, introduce something new, something novel, like screaming, like you said, Jeff. And then the next one is, share constraints. So, sometimes if you've got too much freedom to go anywhere, then it's pretty hard to know which direction you should be going in. If you share certain boundaries or certain norms, then you can kind of be like, okay, well, if we both agree on this definition of it, then we can start talking about it. But before you do that, it can sometimes be a bit chaotic. And then only get mad on purpose. That's the ninth rule. Yeah, that's pretty evident, isn't it? It's like try not to let your emotions get the best of you and get mad. And then the last one is be genuine, be real. That's the golden rule. If you don't do that one, you can't do any of those or any of the others.
I enjoyed that. That was a beautiful little rip. I like it.
Just, you know,
they were coming out like they were just flowing into the next one. It was incredible to watch. Love to see it.
Bro. Cheers, bro.
Definitely cut it up and use it as a little segment. I'd throw that on the site as well. I love it.
Yeah. Beautiful.
Perfect. Well, I think that's a wrap, isn't it? I think that's everything.
Yeah, mate. I think that's a wrap.
Perfect, mate. Well, I'll end the broadcast.
Beautiful.
Bosh.
Well, there you have it, guys. Conflicted by Ian Leslie. Now, if you liked it, make sure to follow or subscribe, depending on what platform you use. Now, I know we are well overdue with this, but we are trying to stay back on track. Next week, we are summarising Influence by Robert Cialdini, a real classic amongst communication and persuasion books. So make sure to stay tuned for that one. But until then, have a good one.